Good morning, everyone. My name is Irena Bednarik, and I'm the Director of Corporate Affairs for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. On behalf of Forum Europe and HPE, I would like to really warmly welcome the over 250 participants to today's conference. We will be looking together and with the help of really distinguished panelists and experts, as you will shortly see, at how high-performance computing, or HPC, has become the real engine of the European data economy. As projected by the Lisbon Council and the International Data Corporation, the European data economy will be worth roughly 550 billion euros by 2025. And in fact, the European Union last year in 2020 has published its European data strategy with a very clear ambition to extract value from this untapped data potential. And secondly, there is a strong desire for this untapped value to be actually redistributed into the European ecosystem. To that end, as I'm sure you're all well aware, the EU is actually redesigning its cloud infrastructure as we speak. So the European data infrastructure, it's actually identifying a series of critical success factors for its European data economy. Today, we will focus actually on two of those: high-performance computing on the one end, and the European processor on the other side. The European data strategy, it's actually identifying the potential of HPC in three critical areas of the European economy. The first one is actually data. The second one is the scientific excellence, so anything related to research. And the third one, it's really the ability of high-performance computing to support the industrial competitiveness of European regional bloc. So Europe has outlined, as we saw, a very clear vision for its data economy and the underpinning success factors, a very clear governance element, and we will dig quite deep today in how the Euro HPC joint undertaking is actually structured. And thirdly, it has actually supported all of this HPC and processor vision with a pretty substantial budget. As we will hear, we have approximately 6 billion euros that will be put on the table between 2021 and 2027, so in the ongoing European budgetary cycle. So Europe's aim is really to design, build, and execute a world-class HPC and big data ecosystem. And yet, HPC infrastructure is not going to be sufficient to achieve this objective. In fact, the other critical element that we will all analyze together today, it's actually the European processor. In fact, the European Processor Initiative has been launched some time ago to design the low-power European processor, and it has achieved today 28 partners across 10 member states. So as you can see, a lot of issues to discuss today, and I'm really honored to welcome today an absolutely stellar set of experts, panelists, and really decision makers on those topics in the European Union. So before we start, just really quickly walking you through the rollout of the 2 hours that we will spend today together. We will have a first part of keynote speeches. They will actually be really a scene setter and will present the vision on HPC and on the European processor from the industry, European Commission perspective, and from the SciPearl perspective. Once this scene setter overview will be completed, we will move on to the panel. We will have approximately 1 hour to really go into the details of a number of questions. And at the end, we will actually leave approximately 25 minutes for questions from the audience. So I would really welcome and encourage you to think about any questions for our experts that you would like to raise. With that, with no further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage our first keynote speaker today. So Gilles Thibault, Managing Director and Senior Vice President of Global Sales for Europe Northwest, of Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Welcome, Gilles.
Good morning, Irena. Good morning, all. Delighted to be with you today.
Great. So, Gilles, could you maybe walk us through the vision HPE has for high-performance computing, and really how, in your view, it's HPC really at the core, powering and enabling the European data economy?
Yes, thank you, Irena. So I'd say that at HPE, our purpose is really to make the full potential of the exascale computing era accessible to as many organizations as possible. And we want to achieve this objective by building on the best of over 4 decades of innovation in supercomputing that led us to become one of the world's leading HPC providers with more than 40% market shares today. 3 beliefs underpin this mission. The first one is that if not everyone needs an HPC system, almost every organization could benefit from HPC technologies. HPC is already much more pervasive than it was in the recent past. It not only allows us to develop services and products more efficiently, but today HPC is also critical to address many of the major societal challenges that we face. As we know, during the COVID-19 outbreak, for example, supercomputers heavily contributed to the search for treatments. A second belief is that synergies between AI and HPC will drive value for both fields. Complex AI models need to train on very large data sets, and HPC compute-intensive capabilities can help prevent potential processing bottlenecks. So we strongly believe that AI and HPC technologies will increasingly continue to support each other. That is also the rationale behind our recent acquisition of the Determine AI software company. Our objective is precisely to leverage their IP so that customers can easily implement and train machine learning models efficiently and at scale. A third belief is that the race for exascale supercomputers should be environmentally friendly. HPC systems are often very carbon intensive due to their powerful processors. At HPE, we see sustainable HPC operations as a strategic imperative. This is why, for example, we are investing in direct liquid cooling, as such systems require up to 70% less energy than traditional ones. Given the potential of exascale computing, it is not a surprise if, together with data and connectivity, HPC is at the core of the European digital strategy. And I want to thank Gustav Kalbe from the DG Connect and Anders Dam Jensen from the Euro HPC joint undertaking for accepting our invitation today. Both will elaborate further on the EU HPC strategy to strengthen the European economic leadership. Europe has been preparing for the exascale era for over a decade. Still, we do consider the setup of the Euro HPC joint undertaking in 2018 as a turning point in this journey. The shift from individual, local-based supercomputer purchases to joint systems investment and resource pooling is giving the region a new competitive edge. One great example is Lumi, Europe's first pre-exascale supercomputer that will be used by 10 European countries. We are proud at HPE to partner with the CSC in Finland to build this pre-exascale system. And I want to thank Kimokoski, the CSC managing director, for accepting to be with us today. Another key initiative to grow Europe's computing capabilities is the European Processor Initiative. The EPI is Europe's ambitious large-scale initiative to develop critical low-power microprocessor technology. It will primarily serve the HPC sector as well as broader markets that demand high-end computing capabilities, such as big data, or emerging applications based on edge computing. SciPearl was created to bring to market the range of microprocessors set out by the EPI roadmap. And Philippe Noton, the CEO of SciPearl, who I thanked for being with us today, will further present the company's mission and progress. Parallel to growing Europe's computing capabilities, we need to accelerate the HPC solution uptake by end users, and in particular by small and medium-sized enterprises. SMEs are the backbone of our economy in Europe. They represent 99% of all businesses in the EU, and they account for 2 out of 3 jobs. HPC is traditionally associated with large-scale projects driven by governments, academia, and big enterprises. But many SMEs would also benefit from HPC solutions to run their business. Think of a manufacturing company using a comprehensive virtual design environment to model and simulate product tests. Virtual simulations mean less physical testing, so faster time to market and significant cost reductions. But here is the rub. While the use of HPC can provide SMEs with significant gains, the cost of owning and maintaining an HPC system is simply not affordable to most of them. European SMEs lack the funds to buy and the expertise to operate HPC systems in-house. But there are several ongoing initiatives to address these issues, such as the Praise Shape program, or more recently, the FF4 Euro HPC. Funded by the Euro HPC joint undertaking, this 3-year project is coordinated by the HPC Center Stuttgart. And I want to thank Dr. Resch for being with us today to share his views on this topic. Another leverage for action is to further lower the HPC running cost to SMEs. Think of the past successful EU-funded Fortissimo projects. Fortissimo 1 and 2 did provide SMEs with a one-stop shop for HPC capacity and applications on a pay-per-use model. This program was proved efficient to increase SMEs' access to HPC systems as it removed the upfront investment needed. New solutions exist, and they can help extend the on-demand consumption model down to the underlying infrastructure. For example, the HPE GreenLake Cloud Services for HPC is a model that allows businesses to combine the power of an agile, elastic, pay-per-use cloud experience with market-leading HPC systems. This ability to pay for each processor, GPU, or storage array on a pay-per-use basis makes HPC affordable to all. In other words, the GreenLake Cloud Services for HPC enable SMEs to innovate on a much more even basis with their largest competitors than ever before. To conclude, Europe is overall well positioned to lead in the exascale era, as it has a number of strengths like a dynamic industrial ecosystem, a joint and coherent strategic research and execution agenda, committed member states, and HPE is committed as well, as we want to help accelerate the European roadmap to achieve exascale excellence while removing barriers to the adoption by smaller companies. With this in mind, I wish you all a very insightful event, and I give it back to you, Irena.
Thank you so much, Gilles, and that was incredibly insightful. So a few points that you touched upon and that we will certainly come back throughout the day. The first one, the pervasiveness of HPC applications. So I still believe that in non-HPC expert communities, there is still the impression that HPC might be a remote technology. In reality, what we want to showcase today, it's really how the applications are, really changing our daily lives actually here and now. And secondly, also the sustainability aspect and how the cooling technology, it's moving from air to water cooling to really make sure that we are more mindful of our environment. So thank you, Gilles. A lot of food for thought, and I'm sure we'll continue digging deeper in those aspects throughout the day. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So, and actually, Gilles also mentioned how the European Union has done something incredibly smart, obviously, to boost its ability to purchase really high-end machines. And this is actually pooling resources and basically move on from member state to member state purchases of machines to a pooled procurement process through the Euro HPC. So, but to hear more about how the European Commission is really looking at HPC and its strategic importance, it's my absolute honor to welcome to the stage Gustav Kalbe. As many of you know, so Gustav is really, hi Gustav and welcome. So Gustav is obviously the Deputy Director of Directorate C in DG Connect, but also obviously leading the HPC and Quantum unit. And Gustav has a really long track record in designing the European vision on HPC, and also has been the acting interim executive director of the Euro HPC joint undertaking. So Gustav, it's fantastic to have you here. You're really the man designing it all. So I would like to start maybe asking you a first more strategic, let's say, question before in the panel we go into the details. And really, how is HPC strategic for competitiveness, strategic for the competitiveness of the European bloc? And how do you see also the movements maybe in other regions of the world? Gustav, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Irina, for the nice introductory words, and thanks most and for all to give me the opportunity to be here today at this high-level event to shed some light and give you an overview of the European strategy and policy in high-performance computing. I mean, incidentally, I was attending the same event almost day by day 3 years ago, where we were facing from the Commission two questions. Why is the Union investing in HPC? Why are you stepping up the efforts? And can you do it? Now, those questions, by and large, have been answered. Notably, can you do it? Yes, we have shown the last 2 years that we can do it. And we're now very happy that with the new framework, we can now massively increase and enhance our ambition and also the actions that we have started. You mentioned in the beginning a volume. I mean, we have now spent the last 2 years $1.5 billion on setting up the whole HPC policy and getting concrete things done. But now we're moving for the next 7 years to 7 billion. We have addressed a number of drivers of key problems that stay valid, that keep driving and designing the strategy policy that we have at the European Union. And I will just mention the top ones, which all are somehow linked. One of the key issues is to have a sufficient number of high-performance computing resources available in numbers, but also in terms of performance. I mean, I don't believe that in this audience I need to convince you that without HPC resources, without world-class access to HPC resources, you cannot do frontier science, your industry cannot be competitive. Even the society will suffer. I mean, just think about extreme weather predictions, climate change, traffic flows, etc. So this is still one of the main priorities of the European policy, which is implemented, which is actionalized by the joint undertaking, and you will hear more from that from my distinguished colleague Anders Jensen. We are now, however, moving into the next phase. I mean, the first 2 years of the existing of the joint undertaking, of really putting into motion the ambitious European strategy, bringing together the Union, the member states, but also associate countries that are not part of the Union, but that share our vision and goals, is to build on the making available an infrastructure of world-class supercomputers, providing access to those machines. But we are expanding this now with other types of computing infrastructures. Notably, we are now entering and connecting with quantum computers. You might argue they're still not at the performance level as the classical machines, but we are preparing the grounds. We're making them available so that in 5, 7, 10 years from now, they will be fully integrated and an integral part of the infrastructure. Making available machines itself is, however, not sufficient. You need to bring those resources closer to the users. The distinguished speaker from HP has mentioned the importance of the SMEs, of all sorts of users that don't have the knowledge or competence in-house to benefit from those resources. So that's why we are implementing and stepping up a number of actions to provide through the competence centers, so dedicated SME support programs, continuing the Fortissimo projects, providing really a network of centers, a network of competences that will facilitate the access of any user, not only to the computing resources, but to all, let's call them digital services that go around. I mean, combining HPC with artificial intelligence, making use of the huge data and research results available in the European Science Cloud, connecting this to the other data spaces. So that really what we're now building on is HPC as the computing resource of what I would like to call a whole digital ecosystem, where we're combining cybersecurity with computing resources, connectivity, access to data, access to service, and so on. Of course, the infrastructure on itself is only, let's call it, half of the equation, which of course includes the accessibility and the skills parts. We are massively investing in the development of the technologies. And here you have to see technologies in the widest sense. You will hear from the next speaker about the big initiative we have in Europe on the European microprocessor. This is part of the whole wider strategy and policy of the digital sovereignty of the Union to achieve two main objectives. First one is to reduce the dependency of critical supply chains, reduce the dependency of critical technology that is not available necessarily in Europe and which might face some restrictions of access. The second point here is that to optimize really the use of the supercomputers, you have to follow a co-design approach where you bring together around the table the manufacturers, the designers, together with the software developers, the coders, the ones that develop the applications, and the users, so that you have really at the end a supercomputer that is optimized for the particular applications to respond to a very clear identified need from the users. So when we talk about the European policy in supercomputing, keep in mind that half or 2/3 of the budget might go in the infrastructure in the wider sense, but this would not be sufficient. This would not be really forward-looking if this was not complemented by an investment of close to 2 billion, also in the development of the necessary underlying technologies for present and future systems, but also including all the applications, software, and so on. And I'm quite happy that we have also Kimokoski in the round that will explain us more in detail how this super computer Lumi that they're building will contribute to this wider picture. So I would really like to close now my short introduction of the overview by highlighting that for the European Commission, high-performance computing is one of the cornerstones of the priority of the Commission, which is the digital transformation, which is not thinkable, which will not be feasible without the real investment, deployment, and stepping up our efforts and ambitions collectively in Europe in HPC. And I'm also quite happy that the distinguished speaker from HP mentioned the topic of sustainability. We are there on the same line as we believe firmly from the Commission that without HPC, we cannot succeed. The other big priority of our current Commission, which is the Green Deal and all the associated aspects around it. I will stop here. I thank you for attention, and I will see you back in the panel discussion with pleasure.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Gustav, and thank you as well indeed for staying in the panel, because here as well, really looking at my notes, a lot of critical topics for today. How do we make easier access and availability to these machines, especially from the SMEs? How do we train also the smaller enterprises to be able to benefit from what the HPC can bring in terms of efficiency and innovation? Last but not least, you obviously mentioned quantum, and we will come in the panel also to the question of the interplay between quantum and HPC. So thank you for setting the scene, and we will come back to you later in the panel. So as we mentioned, so European Digital Strategy, HPC core element of success, and the European processor. So it's an absolute pleasure to welcome to the stage the founder and CEO of Cyperl, Philippe Noton. Philippe, thank you so much for being with us today. An absolute pleasure. And obviously, we would love to hear from you as industrial arm of the European Processor Initiative. Where are you in your plans? So why actually does Europe need to have to produce its own processor when you have obviously vendors from Asia, you have vendors from the US? And last but not least, as we all know, the processors market, it's a very consolidated one. So once you will launch your product in the market, you will obviously have really fierce competition. So what are your thoughts in how will you be actually competitive in this market landscape? The floor is all yours.
Thanks, Irina, for the invitation, and thanks to everybody to attend this video session. So yes, as you said, European processor is critical, and we need to be competitive, and I'm going to explain to you why. So in the top 500 published yesterday, Europe has 7 computers ranked in the top 25, but only 7. Today, supercomputers, as we discussed earlier on, are required to solve scientific and industrial challenges, from vaccine development to climate modeling and energy management. So being competitive in this field has become a subject of strategic sovereign importance. But European supercomputers use mostly non-European technologies. So this lack of European sovereignty has serious implications on our security, intellectual property, IPs, and economic competitiveness in highly strategic markets. To address this problem, EU is strongly involved to assert its technological sovereignty for HPC equipment. On top of the need for HPC, and far before the semiconductor shortage, design of advanced chips, system on chip, and microprocessor was already a key concern, with a lack of real investment and real teams in Europe able to reach worldwide performance and production standards. In 2018, EU had teamed up with several European countries and private partners to launch EuroHPC joint undertaking. These partnerships aim to develop a world-class supercomputing ecosystem in Europe. In this context, while I was working at Atos, we launched the European Processor Initiative, EPI, consortium to answer a European call focused on low-power microprocessor, and as a proposal with the objective of designing, maintaining, implementing the roadmap for developing a new generation of high-performance, low-power microprocessors. The answer we built included IP, such as power management, and other IP such as accelerator, securities, benchmark, and co-design, which is key for what we are building, but also especially a path to a product-based high-performance microprocessor. This H2020 call on low-power microprocessor, and an important milestone for European HPC, is the last extension of the family of Mont Blanc H2020 calls and project which have started in 2011. So it's already 10 years of work and 10 years of life on this kind of design. The consortium we set up, so EPI, won the call for proposal with 28 members, research institutes, universities, supercomputing centers, and leading names from the industry, without being exclusive, of course. Our goal is to foster the return of high-performance processor design to Europe. We are now defining EPI Phase 2 that will start in December 2021 for the next 3 years as a natural continuation of EPI Phase 1. While this setup, we are now full steam ahead on the European HPC machines. let's say, besides this, I created Cyper as a spin-off of the initiative with the support of the European Union, so DigiConnect 2 years ago. We are now deployed in France, Germany, and ramping up in Spain. We are under deployment in the best human resources spots in terms of HPC and semiconductor expertise, and we'll keep on extending our geographical coverage. For instance, we had the chance to take on board more than 1 year ago to ramp up our hardware team in Germany, a firmware team from Intel, which, let's say, has been directly operational. With more than 10 different citizenships on board already, 3 countries for the R&D after 2 years, we by design have broken the usual startup norms to ramp up quickly across multiple sites with the best engineers boosted by EPI member support and competencies. It gives also the chance to be close to our end user and their center of excellence, such as CA, GenC, Jülich, and Barcelona supercomputing centers, with much more to come. And Cyper is bringing to market the high-performance microprocessor designed in Europe, or let's say proudly designed in Europe, that will power our local supercomputers. Human resources being one of the key elements after the access to cash, of course. I assemble a team of experts and managers from Atos, ST, Marvell, Intel, Nokia, MediaTek, and BSC to build a unique team in Europe. We have the opportunity to build a compelling story with technologies and advanced silicon design, which attract the best talents excited about this nice challenge. Knowing that today Europe is not yet self-sufficient in terms of semiconductors, IPs, and technologies, we had to enter, let's say, into 3 strategic partnership areas, which open to us the best of worldwide technologies critical to reach the needed level of performances, and let's say facing global competition. First partnership, Cyper concluded a major license agreement with ARM for using the high-performance, secure, and scalable next-generation ARM Neoverse V1 platform. This is the only solution today in terms of core technology that can give us a quick time to market, limited risk, and proven performances. Second partnership, key electronic design automation vendors, so-called CAD tools such as Synopsys and Mentor Siemens, granted us access to their EDA software, say, developing the design flow. These design tools are the key elements to develop a chip and target top-notch performances, let's say, running at really top speed. Third partnership, we signed an industrial access to the first independent foundry, TSMC, one of the few fab able to reach this level of silicon technology, packaging, and performances. These 3 agreements are the foundation of what is needed to power a team and create design capacities at this level in Europe. Starting almost from scratch, we have access today to the best in terms of global technologies. No legacy to support. We target directly the premium technologies, building a semiconductor Formula 1, or let's say, to confirm our green approach of Formula E. Of course, we would welcome local technologies, including an advanced fab, following the guidance and willingness of Thierry Breton. Stay tuned, we'll use an European fab when available. The microprocessor is a key element of an HPC system, but there are many elements to the supply chain, including logic, wafer and substrate manufacturing, design implementation, so-called the backend, manufacturing management, packaging, test, memory, interconnect, socket, security, system design, acceleration, and software, of course, including the tool chain. Within DPI, we are already working on security, power management, acceleration, and system design. Based on scarcity, manufacturing capability is a focus for the European Union. In the end, developing new technology versus using external will depend on intrinsic value to Europe to develop and sustain the technology, as well as the risk of not having it local. But let's say step by step. In the meantime, we at Cyper, with the help of EPI, we enable the foundations for high-performance computing at semiconductor level. Through close collaboration with our 27 partners from EPI, which are our stakeholders, future client, future end user, Cyper is developing REA, a third-generation microprocessor. The development is well underway, thanks to the lead contribution for our partners in terms of extra human resources for the design, local IP providers, and especially co-design, which is the cornerstone of our specification and simulation. The chip is designed with the user needs in mind and to get a perfect match with their workloads. Dedicated to the HPC market, REA will be launched at the end of next year with a very specific and unique memory architecture, mix of off-chip memory and on-chip high bandwidth memory, HBM. REA is perfectly targeted for European workload. While targeting European HPC markets, REA will be available globally. It will help achieve exascale performance combined with energy efficiency. Cypher is rising at the moment that the whole planet is realizing that after 50 years that the semiconductor is strategic, especially for the digital segment which we address. Beyond powering Europe exascale machine, Cypher and DPI have the thrill of rebuilding a branch of expertise, engineering, which disappeared years ago from Europe and is now critical to open strategic autonomy. To summarize, how to design and later manufacture in Europe fundamental pieces of technologies today for HPC, but later for other data processing segments.
Great. Thank you so much, Philippe, for your perspective. And indeed, as you say, the strategic nature of the European processor has actually been now repeatedly highlighted in a number of European policy documents, not last the updated industrial strategy, where there is really an analysis of European dependencies, and obviously semiconductors are really one of the big ones that will deserve, I understand, even more focus and attention. You touched upon the strategic autonomy of the European bloc, and we will actually come back to this question in the panel because it obviously has a number of ramifications for the economic development of the bloc. So, but thank you for this first, let's say, introductory remarks, and we will come back to this later in the panel. So with this, I hope you enjoyed really a bit of a scene setter as we just concluded. And I would like now to start the panel where we will have a series of experts leading HPC centers, university professors, and research experts that will help us understand yet more in detail some of the aspects that we heard in the keynotes. So I would like to start by inviting Anders Dam Jensen to offer some remarks about the evolution of the Euro HPC joint undertaking. Obviously, Anders, you're the executive director of the joint undertaking, so really terrific to have you with us here today. And maybe to start looking into joint undertaking, obviously established in 2018, ambition to really propel some of the European machines to the top of the Super 500 ranking that has been indeed updated, as Philippe said, I believe 2 days ago. So can you tell us maybe more about where are we in the European journey towards exascale and post-exascale? Do we have all we need to take us there, really? Anders, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. As you're aware, the joint undertaking, we became autonomous on the 23rd of September last year, and really and I joined shortly before that. Really, what we're seeing now come to fruition is very much thanks to all the great work of the interim director that preceded me, i.e. Gustav. When I joined and when we declared autonomy, there were a number of contracts lined up, ready to be executed, and I had the pleasure of signing those. And we're seeing the delivery of the first machines. Vega in Slovenia was operational as of April. We've just inaugurated Melexina here in Luxembourg, and by the way, it's number 4 on the green top list. So that's very much a fantastic achievement. We will have these machines. They will be followed shortly by Karolina in Czech Republic, Discovery in Bulgaria, and at the end of the year we'll have Decalion in Portugal, along with, and I'm sure Kimo will give much more details on that, we'll have Lumi in Finland, and we'll have Leonardo coming live in Italy early next year. So I think we're well on the way of the ambitions that was set out in the what we refer to as the current regulation, and which is what we have a mandate as the joint undertaking to execute at this point in time. We're all eagerly awaiting the very final push on the new regulation that will set the scene for the future, and it is really in its final phase. So we will have that very shortly, which sees us continuing with further investments into infrastructure that will take us to exascale and post-exascale, as well as quantum infrastructure. So I really think, combined with the investments that we're doing on skills and education, and also within supporting, for instance, initiatives like the IPI, I think we're well on the way on the ambition that the Commission set out. And with the new regulation, we will be able to take this to new levels.
Great, thank you, Anders, and great to hear that that we're progressing so well. And congratulations for hitting the number 4 on the green list. And as we say in Italian, ad maiora, that's already an excellent milestone. So moving maybe on to national perspectives, because obviously we talked a lot about the European vision. What is actually happening at the country level? Because Europe is obviously pulling together with member states centrally resources to procure infrastructure. However, there are also still national investments in HPC infrastructure and research that are have been deployed. And so, and I would come, Michael, to you, and first introducing Professor Dr. Michael Resch, leading the HLRS Center. And obviously, my question is really looking at the German plans. So very recently, I believe a few weeks ago, the Federal Ministry of Research and Education launched a program earmarking 300 million euros for research in HPC. And obviously, HLRS being one of the 3 centers of the Gauss network in Germany, you're really at the core of the deployment of this research programs. So I was curious if you could share a little bit with us what is really in the pipeline at German level, and maybe if you could also comment how the German plans are then completing the European ones, and what is the interplay between the two. With that, the floor is yours, Michael. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Irina, for having me. Hello, everybody. And it's a pleasure for me to talk about these 2 questions. One is like, where is Germany headed? And the second is, how do Germany and Europe play together? Let me start with the second, go back to the first, and then finish with the second, probably. Germany and Europe in HPC go hand in hand for quite some time. I remember at the ISC conference in Heidelberg, maybe 2003, maybe 2004, we set up a meeting. At that time, it was the Big Five. It was the UK. I remember Hugh Pilcher-Clayton. And it was France. It was Spain. It was Italy, and it was Germany. And we were discussing at that time how could we bundle all these resources? How could we make the European Commission understand that HPC is important? And at that time, some people were skeptical, but these 5 countries were moving forward, and very quickly a number of other countries joined us. And the background of all this was that these 5 countries had a strategy. So the German strategy started about 30 years ago already. So in the early 90s, there was this thinking about how can we better organize computing in Germany, and then there was a very important decision that said we need to have national centers. And HLRS, by the way, was the first national German center, but that was rather by accident, and then quickly Jülich and Munich followed. And it took something like 10 years to set up these 3 centers, and to balance the collaboration between the 3 centers, and to also find a way to make sure that we don't have 3 national centers, each of them doing the same thing. And then 10 years later, in 2007, the Gauss Center for Supercomputing was created. And the Gauss Center for Supercomputing was already a decision that was not only driven by German requirements of coordinating the three centers, but also by the European requirements, who said, okay, we can do European HPC, but then we need national players. And Germany was in the fortunate position to have three national players, so we decided that we create the Gauss Center for Supercomputing to act as one player. So European HPC was the driving force for Germany, and German HPC was the driving force for Europe. And since 2007, now we are a key partner in the Partnership for Advanced Computing Europe PRACE. We were in the group of the first countries who signed Euro HPC agreement. And these things are progressing in parallel. Now, what is happening in Germany is that Europe has driven German HPC to the point where the German government said, okay, we have to go back to what we discussed in the 90s, where we said, okay, we have tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, and we have this pyramid of performance, which I still think is a very good idea. And what happened is that in the last 3 years, we worked out a strategy where we have the Gauss Center, but at the second level, we also have a national coordination of the tier 2 centers. And in the future, and that's why we have this large program, we will compete for an exaflop system in Euro HPC. We will have the two other centers go for an exascale system, and we will have a research program that basically focus on the challenges of exascale, but also on artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Okay, I'm running out of time. Thank you.
No, that's perfect. And we'll come, Michael, to a number of your points later on. Once again, especially also the relationship between AI and how it's powered by HPC. And so we heard from the HLRS, and I would like now to move on to CSC. So welcome Kimokoski, leading the CSC Center in Finland and obviously coordinating the Lumi consortium to which Anders referred before. So thank you, Kimo, for being with us. And maybe just to start a bit the conversation, obviously at the time of installation, Lumi will be one of the world's fastest HPC centers. And so I understand that theoretical computing power of more than 550 petaflops. So I guess the question really is, what kind of applications are you planning to drive on such a big compute capacity? What kind of societal impact out of these applications? Kimo, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and very nice that you invited me. So, well, maybe first to address a little bit about Anders' point about the time schedule. At the moment, Lumi is pretty well on schedule. The data center is ready and it has been accepted just a few weeks ago. The first systems are coming in one of these days. Actually, they are on the way. And the second phase will hopefully be installed sometime in the end of the year. So we could be starting this full-scale operation for the whole machine in the beginning of next year. So it's pretty good situation still. And we expect it to be so. About the application areas, the design goals of Lumi has been such that it's intended to be in the multiple type of applications, not only just certain types of high-end computing, but you can do a lot of different kind of applications in Lumi. There are different kind of resources like GPUs and CPUs, and also different speed and level of storage. So, but obviously there are some areas where I think we expect kind of good results and some breakthroughs in multiple areas, but in some maybe even more obvious than the others. So, for example, the climate research and earth sciences in general. There is a project in Europe, Destination Earth, Destiny, which is of course a really interesting potential tool for the breakthrough in the climate and earth science research. So that's one of the focus areas. Then in this area of plasma physics, for example, we are running extremely advanced projects for space weather. It's also kind of something to do with climate, but space weather, space climate. This can have consequences, for example, to electricity networks or satellites when we have some symptoms coming out of the space. So it's important topics, these ones, and also similar kind of things like the extreme weather conditions where you can actually save lives. Medical area is, of course, one of the areas where supercomputing has recently also proven to be very important topic. I don't think we would have a COVID vaccination today if we wouldn't have had high-end computing resources. That's one of the areas that Lumi will also address. And maybe a few more examples and areas of life sciences, genomics, etc., and material sciences, for example. So it's really a wide spectrum of different kind of applications.
Terrific, thank you. And maybe moving on to our last, but certainly not least panelist, maybe introducing first Uwe Haus, leading the HPC and AI Research Lab for Europe, Middle East and Africa at HPC. And maybe, really, Utz, looking at your research activities in the region, and I'm sure some are actually touching upon the areas that Kimo just actually mentioned. So why are you investing in research in this field in Europe? What kind of outcomes are you planning actually to achieve? Utz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irena, and thank you to all the other speakers who have done a wonderful introduction already. Half of my project remarks already have a background against that. So let me take a step back and first comment on where this dedicated research lab in HPE comes from. We basically bundled up different efforts in research and development in Europe more than half a decade ago in Cray. When we decided that it's better to have a dedicated team that is European-based, and that can directly work not only with customers, but rather also non-customers, because working with customers as a company is great for the customers and for the company, but it's a bit like in academia if you only work with your own students or your close friends. The academic advancements come from talking to those that you normally don't collaborate with and whose ideas are not your own. And so that's how we started our own program to find partners that will get HPE, previously Cray, integrated into the European topics. And now you might argue whether there are European topics that are not worldwide topics, and I would argue strongly in favor of that. If you think back, GPU acceleration was a topic coming out of Europe. We did the first prototypes of that in Europe, albeit in Switzerland, but that's still Europe to some degree. It's a topic that was novel to HPC a decade ago and has become standard now, in particular with the AI applications of GPUs. There are some codes that are just different in Europe than they are in other parts of the world. We already heard the space weather remark from Kimo. The Blasiator code from Mina Palmström is one of those. That is really a European code, has a European user base. And for HPE, it's critical to understand all the users' needs. There's also others. We don't have to go through that. This audience likely knows all the big codes that can fill an exascale system. But really, it's also about the other ones. Europe, in its federated setup, we also see that with consortia like Lumi, brings together the need of running computations not only in one site. Users will start on their local system. They will move to a closer by national HPC center. If their code needs it, they move part or all of their computation to one of the top tier systems through Praise. And with all of that comes a need for working with distributed workflows, coupling applications. And that's really something that grew out of Europe as a demand to get users' abilities strengthened to do this kind of vendor-neutral cross-site operations of HPC. we're no longer locked into a single data center as a user. And I think my team really had a chance to learn about that early on through collaboration. And I hope we have shown that we can contribute in FedHPC projects that are coming to an end this year, where we have some really nice results on how to do workflows, how to handle heterogeneous systems. And also outside of the main HPC space with HPC applications, energy networks. How do we strengthen European long-term energy planning with computational results that give the network operators, the DSOs and TSOs confidence that their plans actually hold up to the reality in 30 years. With renewables and the instability of the grid that might result from that, that's another strong European topic that really is taken up around the world, but was started in Europe. And finally, I think another important part is that Europe has much stricter ideas and philosophies around data protection. I share those personally, but for computational aspects, it's one aspect that really needs to be built in to the workflows from the beginning. And so working with data securely and in a trustworthy way is really a European topic that we enjoy collaborating with. Finally, we do have manufacturing in Europe, in Kutná Hora in Czechia, and that is going to be a site that is able to build water-cooled systems for the exascale area. The factory is being outfitted, and some parts of Lumi will be built in Europe. Not yet from European components exclusively, but we heard Philippe Noton tell us we're getting there, and we'll be happy to join such efforts to shorten the supply chain and make it more stable. So thanks, Irena. Ready to answer other questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Utz, for walking us through your European efforts. So I would like actually to ask a question to the entire panel, because we obviously are ramping up to an incredibly powerful infrastructure in Europe. But what about access? Can you maybe share with our audience, how do you plan the access to this compute power to be governed, and how can maybe also players with less experience, use these machines if at all they will be able to do so? So whoever wants to go first. Sure, Anders?
I think I could at least take the umbrella approach on the top. I mean, the Euro HPC machines are governed by access to the Europe HPC machines are governed by an access policy, which, by the way, if anyone's interested, it is available on our website. So there's a process, and there are different types of modes, and those who are sitting out there familiar with the praise methodology should feel it very familiar. We've built on the expertise that praise has built up over the years, and we've refined it to include what was required for the joint undertaking and the machines there. So at the outset, that would be where you go if you wish to have access to these machines. You can see at that level how to go about it. Then of course there are a number of projects that uses that access, so there will be the centers of excellence, the competency centers, and so on that will facilitate, for instance, when SMEs wishes to get more involved in it and the like. So, but there are multiple tiers. But at the outset, the access of the time that is managed by Euro HPC is governed by the access policy, which is controlled by our government board.
So may I also add something?
Sure.
Yeah, so also I think the access policies are being formed, I think, in JU and also in each of the countries who also have ownership of part of the resource. But in addition to the access, the important question is, of course, that how do we get best out of the machines? And that means that we need to invest on competence development. There are a lot of new areas of discipline where people are not that used to use hyper-advanced computing than in physics, for example. Physics is very experienced, but I mean, social sciences that can be a different case. So you need different kind of assistance and support there. And in addition to that, competence development for the new areas, you also need to train and resource people who are, we, for example, as every center, we have people who used to be researchers, for example. They have a research background, but the task nowadays is not to do their own research, but help the others to, to access the machines and analyze the code and develop things. So support structure and competence development is a very important area where we need to invest also, not only to the machines.
Great, and indeed, this is actually a good transition to the Euro competence centers. And Michael, obviously, HLRS has a coordination role there. So I was quite curious to hear from you. What do you see in terms of skills build up, upskilling really in HPC competencies, and whether you already start seeing this network being well functioning?
I think we did a lot of preparatory work already in the PRAISE projects, and we can build on the expertise of the national centers that we have in Europe with different speed at which individual countries are moving. But let me side with Kimo. We have this situation that we have to get users up to speed with the systems. This is a permanent challenge, and we have this educational part where we say, okay, we need more university education to make sure that the students that leave universities are able to use the systems. But we also need this educational part and training part when we come in with new technologies, we come in with a new processor like the European Processor Initiative processor, where we have to say, okay, we need to get these people up to speed as fast as possible. So what we see is that the access policy is there, and I think it is well established because it is science driven. It is mainly looking at the quality of the scientific approach and not so much at say more political issues, although these come in from time to time. But I think with respect to education, we will have to do more. We will have to do more at the university educational level, but also the centers will have to make sure that we have this transition from your general knowledge that you get from a university education to the very special knowledge that is required to use this or that system efficiently. And when we look into these fields, we have to keep in mind the challenges that we have. One is speed. Another one is power consumption or sustainability, as we call it. So we need to address all these issues in an educational program that we are running.
Absolutely, and maybe the coming to the point on universities and let's say funding. The second stage of the Euro HPC is dedicating like a special stream of funding to skills in particular. And I was curious whether we feel on your end as experts and really leading these projects in the field, do you feel that this is sufficiently funded, or are other elements something we should be looking at?
Well, let me answer the question in a very logical way. If ever you ask a scientist whether there is enough funding for an important thing, no scientist will ever say yes. I think funding is appropriate. That's as much as I can say without being killed by my scientific colleagues. Yeah, I think funding is appropriate, but we need to be very, very careful to say, okay, we do not do a funding for some general, okay, let's develop some skills, but we need to make sure that, and I think Philippe spoke about this development of hardware and development of software co-development. Yeah, we need to make sure that we sync all these things, and that's why I'm so happy with having Euro HPC, because we have an organization that now says, okay, I'm not only looking at hardware like the vendors did in the last years. We're not only looking at applications like the scientists did and said, okay, my application is the most important one. And we're not only looking at the services, we are looking at the things at the same time. And we say, okay, if I develop this processor here, I need this expertise on the side of the users. And I need this level of expertise at the centers. You have to run the systems, you have to use the systems, and we have to bring all these players together. And I think it's not so much a question of whether there is $1 million more or less of funding there. It's very, very important that this is a coordinating funding activity. And to finish that appropriately, no, there is never enough funding for skills development. Okay.
We take your point, but I thought that the fact already that the second stage of the JU was really installing kind of a separate funding stream for skills was certainly at least a step in the right direction. I don't know, Gustav, if you want to share some thoughts on this topic in particular.
Indeed, I mean the skills part is one of the key aspects, not only of the new UHPC joint undertaking was also present in the past, but of course we didn't have the means to deploy it at the level that we now have at our disposal. I would, however, not hinge the question only on the matter of funding. I mean, we put as much as we can without drowning the market, and I'm glad that Mr. Resch said it's appropriate. That's fine. I would rather emphasize the whole breadth of different actions that we're putting to address the skills gap, and we not call it only skills, but we call widening in usage, because we need to address several aspects. We need to train the professionals. We need to have a much broader base of experts that can use the machines, operate them, program, and so on. But then there's the big aspect of, let's call it, untapped users that might not even know that they need HPC, and sometimes they don't even care what HPC is about, or AI, or so on. And here we have in particular in mind the SMEs. We have some very good experience with the Fortissimo project, and we're expanding it, and we're so happy that we now have the network of competence centers to address a business problem that those users have on the digital transformation, and where we really need to provide the necessary competences, knowledge, but also facilities to help those new users to benefit from the HPC by providing them the access, by helping them build their business case, by finding the right application they need for adapting the codes or the simulations or the applications to address their specific need, or just to be able to tap this huge this huge network of competence centers, of supercomputing centers, of even organizations like Praise that have already in-house what this user needs, and redirect this user with all the support services to the right place.
Excellent. Thank you, Gustav, for that. Are there any final comments on the skills topic? Sure, Utz.
So from the industry point of view, I'd like to make two comments that kind of confirm what Michael just said. We in the industry have tremendous issues hiring the right people to support our activities. And I always feel bad poaching people from centers like HRS and similar, although it's going back and forth, obviously. But we really believe that educations that have, for example, a master in HPC, where it's not subject-driven from a particular discipline, but rather from the HPC knowledge side, is a great idea. And I'm very happy to see the current call of your HPC on that. There needs to be more of that. For example, a research software engineer needs to be an education that people are proud of, instead of taking it up as a learned training because they're physicists and need to get working on an HPC system. So there's still potential beyond just an academic education. And from the other side, I really think that we need to make HPC more accessible, need to hide some of the complexity for some of the users. Not all of them, but some users, as we already heard, they don't care where their deep learning setup is running. They just want results. And getting things packaged and reusable across sites and accessible, integration with ERP systems for companies makes it much easier to run some of their large computations, their data mining, in their current system. And so that's where we have churn that takes extra effort, and where we can make a big difference in connecting HPC centers like a cloud service to the users at the other end. And hopefully Gaia X is a venue towards that. But Gaia X is just the foundations. We also need to do the real coding.
Thank you. And maybe since you touched upon the need to make HPC, let's say, simpler in a way from a use case perspective, let's say tangible probably, do we want to spend some words maybe on some use cases that you are all running that are very impactful in, let's say, everyday society? So you touched upon some, but maybe we can dedicate a bit more time to some of these results. I think that would be interesting for our audience. Sure, Michael.
Let me give two examples, which highlight a little bit also the issues that we just discussed. One of our users is a very small company. It's about 10 people, and they're working on the optimization of power plants. Now, they are extremely skillful in doing these optimizations, but it's an extremely small company. So what we set up is a very simple case for them. We said, okay, you're a customer, you can access our systems. And like 2 or 3 times a year, they come to us and say, we have a power plant in this or that European country. We need a simulation and we need to optimize. And they run for 2 days or 3 days or something like that. That's something which is not very big on our agenda. It's a very, very small side business. But for this company, it's critical. And it allows them to optimize power plants to reduce CO2 emissions, but also other emissions. And that's very critical for them. The second thing, a new community. When the coronavirus appeared in Germany early in March, 2 weeks later, we got a phone call from a government agency who said, well, we have a program that allows us to predict intensive care unit usage, ICU usage. But we only have a laptop. And we don't know exactly what we could do with that. And we said, okay, we'll get a team together. I got the phone call Friday night and I said, I'll call my staff. And by Saturday morning, we had a team together and we started to work on this. And that's, for them, it was entirely new. And for us, it was nearly entirely new. I'm very happy that we had some funding from the European Commission in a Center of Excellence in Global System Science, because we had some expertise coming from this Center of Excellence. And so gradually we put something together. And today, like 5 months after that call, we started to deliver a daily prediction of ICU usage for the federal government in Germany. And it's something that is very unusual because these guys don't use supercomputers. We are not used to that. That's not physics, that's not chemistry, biology, engineering. That's something completely different. And I think this is what we have to do in the future. We have to pick up the cases. We have to find the situations where we say, okay, these people don't know what they could do. Let's tell them what they could do. And I'm happy to say that the federal government said, okay, that's a good case. We should fund the project to see how more agencies in Germany could benefit from such a thing. And we hope to start that project in October, November this year.
Amazing. Wow, amazing project, especially when you hear that ICU usage, the only thing they had at their disposal was a laptop. That is quite scary. So very interesting and compelling examples. And I guess also one of the reasons why we wanted to do this event today was, and in the audience we have HPC specialists and more general, let's say, governmental audiences. And the whole purpose of this conference was to start trying to bridge this gap on what can be done with HPC applications in a daily life. But maybe I would like to give Kimo the floor, because Kimo, you already mentioned in your previous intervention a few areas where you're active, Earth observation program, research on new materials. So any additional elements would you like to expand on any of the use cases in particular?
Yes, so I think there are pretty many, and fortunately more are coming as it advances. But maybe some of the area which is not yet mentioned is in the social sciences. So what we are doing in some cases is a large-scale data analytics from the social networks and the modeling of these complex societal phenomena. So there is a lot of data, of course, in the social media, for example, or being published in the web, and not only in the text mode, also in the forms of video or imaging, so pattern recognition and this kind of thing. So those kind of applications, they will be more and more general also in the future. So, and that actually expands the area of application from the traditional physics or climate also to new areas. Maybe another area where we have been recently using image analysis and also text analysis is, for example, how do I say, the cultural inheritance. For example, there is a lot of for old books and publications, etc., where you actually can search different common patterns and store them in a digital form. So there's another area where we have recently been using a new area for us in this HPC area.
Excellent. Thank you, Kimo. I'd like to actually take a first question that we received from the audience. And the question comes from a gentleman, I do apologize for mispronouncing the name, Joachim Ertebjerg, apologies Joachim, from Intel. And he's basically asking Philippe Noton the following, and I quote, EPI is making serious proof points for EU-developed IP, but are there initiatives funded to productize the IP? What are the EU IP elements that SciPearl plans to integrate? Do you want to comment, Philippe?
Yes, thanks, Joachim, for the question. So there are multiple dimensions. So first, EPI is, let's say, financing or thanks to DigiConnect, the foundation to build the IP and to build the processor. But basically, it's not sufficient to build a full processor and later a full system. For instance, for €1 that SciPearl receive part of EPI and part of the EPI contribution, we have to source €15 basically on the market in terms of raising money, and which is, you can imagine, a challenge. So there is a big gap in between the IP we build in EPI and the product. That's one of the elements, but there are lots of good IPs which are currently under design, that for some of them have already been proven or will be tested in the second phase of EPI, and there are some other IPs which basically don't exist in Europe today, which is even more complex. So in terms of memory controller, in terms of interconnect, and of course the core itself, today does not exist in Europe. It may arrive later on with open hardware or based on other initiative, but let's say the path or the path from IP maturing, academic IP or EPI level to product, it's basically years to do. That's why we start in some cases with some off-the-shelf component. Now there are some, I said, very interesting IP under development, like accelerator, that may be used later on, but here also it's, let's say, multiple steps to reach production quality. And if for the core design we have started with ARM for the first chip, it's ARM job to sell IPs, to support them, and I said earlier on during the keynote, that's the only way to build a chip and have it on the market in 3 years from now.
Great, thank you, Philippe. And I think that the IP question will come again and again, also again linked to the digital sovereignty topic. And indeed, maybe since I mentioned that. So obviously, European open strategic autonomy is an imperative of the European policies. And this really then has ramification and effects in the various issues that we have discussed today. And my question really to you is, does Europe have all it needs to achieve this strategic independent autonomy, open strategic autonomy, or are there other pieces and elements that will need to be highlighted more? And again, we touched with the EPI already this topic to an extent, but I don't know, maybe Gustav, if this is something you would like to offer some thoughts about.
Yes, definitely, Irina. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to give some further elements on the open strategic autonomy. If you look at where we are today, I would say we don't have yet all the elements at our disposal in Europe to achieve the strategic autonomy, although we made some progress in the last 2 or 3 years, and I expect that we'll be much further in the next few years. I would nevertheless point out that strategic autonomy does not mean we want to be, a closed continent where we are producing up to the last bolt everything ourselves. You're rightfully highlighted also the aspect of the open strategic autonomy. So we want and we need to reduce the dependency of strategic technologies from sources outside, but we are partnering with entities that can help us in reaching strategic autonomy. The CyPearl is a very good example of producing one of the key components that we are missing in the European Union, which is the microprocessor. We also see then coming the accelerators, where we will keep the investment and the development. The aim is that in a couple of years for the exascale, we'll be able to procure and install at least one of the supercomputers that are based on indigenous European technologies, but we keep the door open to alternative approaches, partnering, where it makes more sense and where we have an unrestricted access to state-of-the-art technology to keep building our HPC ecosystem. The last thing I really would like to underline is that HPC is seen as a strategic asset for basically every economy, for all the big countries and also the small countries. And we must make sure, and that's where we created the whole initiative about UHPC, that at any time the European Union has the full control and access of HPC resources, of HPC competences, of HPC technology that allows it to stay in the forefront of science, of the development, of developing its economy, rather than being overly dependent or at, let's say, not at the level of performance that we need to keep our science and economy thriving.
Great, and I think that's a great message, Gustav. So more indigenous technology to be less dependent, but still open to collaboration globally. Anybody else would like to comment on the question of strategic autonomy of the bloc?
I think I would side with Gustav. As strange as it may sound, autonomy is only achieved in that field if you're able to collaborate and cooperate. And I think we will have to balance these two things. We will have to make sure that we create our own IP, our own building blocks, our European strong points, and we will have to make sure that we collaborate with our partners worldwide to keep this open. Openness is something which for scientists is extremely important.
Great. I would then take another question that we received from the audience, and really proprietary versus open source question. The question has been raised by Gabriele Paciucchi from NVIDIA. And I quote, EuroHPC is funding ARM-based initiatives such as EPI CyPearl, but also RISC-V-based initiatives. What's the long-term view of EuroHPC comparing proprietary hardware IP versus open source hardware IP? I guess that's for Anders.
So, I mean, RISC-V is the up-and-coming new kid on the block. And there's a lot of discussion within EuroHPC and in the governing board about how we take that forward. We have a lot of investment in the on the ARM side, but we're supporting we're supporting both of the research into both areas. With CyPearl, there's a lot of great research that's been done into the foundation of what it means to create a processor. What ISA will flourish in the future, I think it's too early to tell, but there's no question that RISC-V is extremely interesting. The concept that the ISA is open and can be used without restrictions is extremely appealing. Will we have a RISC-V processor tomorrow? No, we've seen how long it takes just for what we're doing with the ARM side. I'm sure if we set out to do something on RISC-V, we'll be able to learn from that and piggyback on it. But what we should not forget is the ecosystem that needs to be developed around the ISA. It's taken a long time for what's already been achieved around the ARM processor, and with RISC-V, we need to do something similar. So one very interesting discussion at the moment is whether we embark down a RISC-V route and really, but the support will have to be holistic. It's not just developing the processor; it also has to develop the whole ecosystem and porting the required software onto that. And let's remember that, I mean, from that point of view, RISC-V is a fantastic initiative. I have little microcontrollers that run RISC-V, but there's quite a gap between that and powering an HPC environment. So, but it's definitely something that's being monitored very closely by our research and innovation advisory group, and I think it's definitely one of the very interesting discussion topics for the new regulation and the work program that we're going to set out for that. So.
Great, thank you, Anders. And Philippe, do you want to comment from a CIPA perspective?
Yes, let's say with business, pragmatic, and industrial approach. So first, to go back to the initial question, so EPI or DigiConnect, part of this program, they don't finance ARM. They finance mainly manpower to develop expertise around, let's say, supercomputing. And today, even having, which is not the case, having an ARM license for free or ARM IPs for free, we still need dozens of million euros, even more than this, to build the chip. And that's also the concept about open hardware, which is very good. There are lots of stuff, especially around RISC-V, which are under maturing. But when you have an open hardware IP, after to build a chip, you don't use a 3D printer. It's much more complex than this. You still need to add tons of components and tons of technology to convert your open hardware IP to a processor and to it the market. So that's a long way. And also, even today, imagine that we could have, this will take years, but a very good open hardware RISC-V processor. There are still plenty of technologies that you need in the chip, like interconnect, memory controller, PHY, and some pieces of IPs, which today I have not seen any open hardware program to develop them. Of course, they are welcome, but it's going to take a while and maybe never for these pieces of IPs. Open hardware, yes, but in fact, we need much more. And after, if you include the need for, let's say, design tools, the need for a fab, in that you start to top up tons of different budgets that we don't have today, and will take let's say a longer time.
Great, and maybe just one question, and again you a little bit touched upon that in your previous intervention. So what is your ambition, to design European chip technology or also to manufacture in Europe? So I don't know if this is, too early to comment, or, for what you could tell us.
So we are fabless, like plenty of other companies which are doing semiconductor. So we are not integrated, working, let's say, on a fab. It's another class of issues, another class of budget. So today we had no choice, because to be competitive on the worldwide market, you need to use the best silicon processes. So today 6 nanometer, but let's say smaller later on. And when we, let's say, defined this project and we made the critical choices, it was only 2 fabs were available. So TSMC in Taiwan and Samsung in South Korea. Now, with the willingness of Intel to open a fab in Europe, we may have some other, let's say, choices in the next years. With the willingness of Thierry Breton to have a 2 nanometer or 3 nanometer fab in Europe, which is another channel, why not? We'll be happy to use them. But today it's far beyond our control. We'll just be a user or an happy user to load the fab, but to load only a fraction of the fab. Because even with, let's say, very good volume that we may ship for European, let's say, European machines and other segments later on, Cyper will only be able to load 1%, maybe 2% of the fab. So basically, let's say it's a global consideration in Europe. So having a fab, yes, but which kind of product we are going to manufacture in this fab?
Yeah. Thank you, Philippe. Maybe coming to the applications. So do you feel that the applications are getting ready for the exascale era? Are we doing enough on this front, or more needs to be done? Anyone? Gustav, can I call you out?
Yes, you can call me out. I mean, on the application side, there are, let's say, two key elements we have to keep in mind. The first one is, without the applications, pointless of having all these supercomputers. And in Europe, so far, we have been very strong worldwide on developing applications that take the most out of the machines that we have at our disposal. If we compare the nominal pack performance, maybe in Europe we don't have the top 5 or top 7, whatever, supercomputers, and in the last few years we're even not in the top 10. But to run the same problem, we get much better results from the applications that we have developed in Europe. And that's where we will keep focusing for the next few years, is on one hand to keep this massive advantage of excelling really in developing the applications in Europe. But of course, this has two side dimensions. One is with the new exascale and post-exascale supercomputing coming up, with a hybrid HPC quantum machine, we need to keep developing the applications that run on those computers and take most of the increased performance, but also adapted to the specific architectures of those machines. So that's why I come back to this co-design approach, where we really need to have close, I mean, here in Europe, the possibility to bring together the developers, the designers of the systems, of the components, of the integrators, the software developers, the application coders, and the users, so that we can keep excelling on the application side, but also be able to make available to our users the applications that really exploit the exascale and post-exascale machines.
Absolutely. And the Kimo, did you want to also comment on that?
Yes, just a few points. I mean, first of all, of course, we need application development in a traditional CPU based, but the world is more and more going towards GPUs. So porting the key codes from CPU to GPU is one priority area. This trend has already been happening in some areas. Obviously, cannot be done everywhere, but I mean some areas. So, for example, in Switzerland, they don't only have good football players, but they also have something else, that they have been able to port climate code to these climate codes to GPUs, and that's one good example of that. So porting the codes to GPUs is one tendency. Then Gustav mentioned also quantum computing, which I think, in my opinion, this will sooner or later be just another module of the high-end computing devices. So some of the applications are fitting much better, or in some of the applications, quantum computers are superior. So that is also kind of application development, even though this is only some years to come. So so there is a quite a lot of work here ahead, and we talked about competence development. It's another area. We need to have competent people to do these applications, but then the focus on the modern application scaling and development is of course important too.
Thank you, Kimo. And Michael, did you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, I think we can see that we have a small number of applications that are moving in the right direction already. The usual suspects like quantum chromodynamics or particle physics, or also some CFD guys. Communities that have a 40 years expertise, 50 years expertise in using supercomputers. So I think we're doing a great job there. What I would like to point at is that we see new opportunities coming up, new applications that are only made possible because we have exascale systems, but also new applications that are only possible because now we can combine artificial intelligence methodologies, working on data, with simulation technologies, working on models. And we should see how we can bring these things together, HPC, traditional HPC, with accelerators, artificial intelligence methodology, but also quantum computing. And I think this is a field that still has to be explored. There are some natural first picks that you could make, but I think we should do something there to see what is it that we can do when we go beyond the traditional HPC, which is going to happen in the next 5 years.
Great. And actually, this is leading me to my next question, which is really the relationship between quantum and HPC, because I do sense that the narrative on the relationship between the two technologies is actually shifting. So we did have a period that, probably is phasing out, where the two technologies were seen as competitive, and quantum will come down the line in a few years. However, the relationship between the two, and what Gustav and Kimo you just hinted, it's something that we hear more and more. How can we actually use the best of the two technologies, having quantum applications run on HPC infrastructure, and really, let's say, probably take the best out of the two in a mode that is much more complementary than competing as it used to be in the past. So, is this change of narrative something that you also see in the market? Could you maybe comment on that?
Well, I'm happy to say something. I think the narrative that quantum computing replaces high-performance computing was probably mainly driven by marketing, because you had to find a way to explain what a quantum computer could contribute. So companies were looking for examples where they said, okay, on a traditional supercomputer, it would last like that, but I can do it on a quantum computer in a much shorter time span. That was necessary, that was okay, but I think we are aware today that quantum computers can solve different problems. And the integration, that is sort of a concept that was developed in HPC over the last decades, is that when you have a new technology, you try to integrate that technology in your overall concept. That we might see systems that are partially traditional HPC accelerators whatsoever and partially quantum computing. We might see systems where we have a separate HPC and a separate quantum computing system. But what we will see, I believe, is we will see people who develop applications that require both things at the same time, working together to develop a single solution. And that's a challenge for the centers now. This is going to be a challenge for the next 5 to 10 years to set up an environment where a user can say, okay, this is my problem. And the center says, okay, we will solve it. This part runs on a traditional supercomputer. This part runs on a quantum computer, either in a single system or in separate systems. You don't have to care. You just get your solution. So we have a challenge there, and I think that the narrative changes, and I think people start to understand quantum computing has a very bright future, and we can benefit from that. And by the way, we do not even know yet exactly what we will be able to do with quantum computing in 5 to 10 years from now. It's very, very open, and we will have to adapt to that.
Thank you, Michael. Gustav, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Irina. Just to complement and underscore what Michael just said. I mean, the narrative has changed a couple of years ago. If you go back 10 years, it was, okay, quantum computers will one day outperform classical and will replace everything. Now, the discussion is not there. It's not a competitor, but it's another highly parallel computing element that can be intelligently integrated with the classical machines. And the challenge, as Michael has rightfully pointed out, is to understand for which type of problems or which type of applications is it best run on a standalone single quantum computer, or on which type of problem you need to collocate both systems, or for which problems you go for the modular approach where you have quantum accelerators as you have now the GPUs. And this is the challenge that we started now to address with the UHPC joint undertaking by making available the first quantum simulators, by buying quantum computers. We're now going to buy quantum accelerators, hopefully, to make them accessible to the developers, to the users, to precisely address those questions, not only about further maturing those quantum devices, but to understand under which conditions is it best to use them. And indeed, at the end, for the user, it would be totally irrelevant if the problem is run on classical CPU, on a quantum accelerator, on the neuromorphic accelerator, whatever. We need to take most out of the available architectures to keep the increase in performance, but at the same time also further reduce the power consumption of the systems we're making available.
Great, thank you, Gustav. And indeed, I guess we come back to the point of the outcome is really what matters, and let's use the best available technologies and architectures to get there. Kimo, did you want to comment on this as well?
No, actually, I would have said that highlighted that quantum computers are complementary solutions, not competing to supercomputers, but that already came both from Michael and Gustav. So
great.
That's it, I think.
But I will stay with you maybe for a last question on my end. And already we did take a few questions from the audience, but I will definitely encourage people that are attending, if they have any further questions, to raise them. But I'm coming now to the environmental question. Obviously, there is a concern, as we said, HPC, large consumer of electricity, needing cooling as well. But at the same time, there are technologies out there that allow more energy efficient HPCs. And on the other hand, from an application perspective, HPC simulations can support more energy efficiency in various industrial fields. And so maybe a question to you, Kimo, because obviously, you have your center in Finland. Clearly, I would guess, but clearly looking for your insights. Electricity cost and climate conditions probably are two quite relevant factors. But how do you approach, especially considering that you will have once deployed the Lumi system as one of the most powerful machines? So how are you approaching the environmental concern of HPC?
Yes, thanks. This question I like a lot, and I like it a little bit too much. It might take hours to explain, but I mean I try to be short. So obviously the environmental things, and they have been one of the criteria why we have been establishing our data center there in Kajaani. It's an old paper mill, and so when there was paper machines, they used to run 235.5 megawatts of power, and now with Lumi we are a bit less than 10, and a few megawatts on top of that in CSC's national system. So, but in energy efficiency and environmental things, they are good because they well, there are two benefits. First of all, you save the environment, and then you actually save money, because if you use less electricity, then you actually can also run it cheaper. So basically, our air-cooled systems, we were mainly cooling them earlier by opening the windows. So that actually cost very little electricity. And nowadays, today with Lumi, I think one of the key topic is that the excess heat. First of all, of course, the electricity that is being used is fully renewable, so it's hydropower. Actually, there are 3 local hydropower plants, and so on and so on. But also, when you use the electricity, the excess heat will be used to warm the flats in Kajaani area, so the city near city where it's placed. So you can also use that, and the carbon footprint becomes very low. Actually, if we can save the electricity company not using fossil fuels, but this excess heat, it can be even almost negative. So this is the way how we try to combine both the environmental things and also the cost efficiency things related to that, because they also pay money for this excess heat. So that means that it gets even cheaper.
Interesting. And so it's a real circular economy approach that then you have basically installed with the heating then of the flats of your staff.
Yeah, exactly. And we have been running in production actually since 2010, because that was when we first came there. So we have a lot of experience, and during these years, a lot of all kind of ideas have been tried and tested. Like, for example, pile all the snow during the winter to a certain place where you get cooler water, and so on. So this is it's not only running the computer; it's also a nice research area, how to make more eco-efficient devices or data center equipment. So that's also being studied by some companies there.
Yeah. And Utz, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, very much so. Even though maybe Michael will be angry for taking some of his words. So the for HPE, really, the vision of a data center where our systems can be modulated according to the needs of the applications, the job mix, and maybe the power grid around it is really a target that we're looking at in Europe. And we've started with HLRS on power efficiency measures in their current system, but there's much more to be done. We recently completed a project with EDF and some other very relevant partners on the European energy networks, studying how different devices on the network could lead to more stability. And I think data centers are the next item that could, combined with renewables, absorb extra load, because they're designed for larger peak flop ratings than are normally used. If we can shift the job mix to the right mixture to consume extra energy and drop it at other times, that is something that we're giving up a lot of efficiency on. And really, we should look at the Green 500 list, but we should look even more at the flops per watt in real application mixes. How can we save energy for particular jobs? And it turns out that there's a lot of space for savings in the big systems, and that's a topic that we need to explore much further.
Great. And Michael, do you have some comments as well?
Yeah, I think we need to take a comprehensive approach here. HLRS was picking up that issue like 6 years ago, and we decided to be certified according to the Eco Management and Audit Scheme, EMAS, a European scheme for sustainability and eco. And what we learned in the process is that yes, it's power, it's cooling, it's optimizing your data center, but there is much more that we can do. We have some operational issues. You can run a system energy efficient, or you can run it less energy efficient. And then we have power efficient programming. We started to train our users 2 or 3 years ago in programming a system such that it requires less power. And the good part is, the less power you consume, the higher your compute speed, because the driving factor for power consumption is the memory. If you don't access your memory, you have less power consumption, and at the same time, you waste less time. So I think if you take this comprehensive approach, you start with how your system is manufactured and you end with how the system is programmed, then I think we have, again, and I'm very optimistic about that because I'm always looking for a work that we have to do. For the next 5 to 10 years, there is a hell of a lot of work in energy efficiency and in becoming climate neutral, which is our target. By 2032, HLRS wants to be climate neutral.
Excellent, great to hear. And Philippe, did you want to comment at the silicon level regarding sustainability and energy efficiency?
Yeah, at silicon level. So first, for our first generation working with ARM, ARM is coming from the mobile phone business. So basically their DNA, it's energy efficiency and to have the best performances per watt. So that's related to the core. Now at pure silicon and process level, if you compare what we can do, basically almost the best in Europe today in terms of silicon process, 28 nanometer, with what you have today in Asia in 5 nanometer, where basically all the new chips are let's say coming from now, from 28 to 5, you have first an improvement in terms of gate density of 10. So basically for the same, let's say, square millimeter, you can have 10 times more, let's say, transistors on the same surface. But what matters in terms of green is that when you move from 28 nanometer to 5 nanometer, per switch, when you have a basic gate which is commuting from 1 to 0, 0 to 1, you save 10x in terms of energy. And that's where the efficiency is coming from. So of course, you add more transistor, the chip will be more powerful and will, let's say, will drive faster, but it's a ratio of 10, basically from 28 to 5. So it's huge in terms of global savings.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And Kimmo, did you have a final comment maybe on this topic?
Yeah. So just to highlight that the thing we talked previously, that competence development can also save a lot of energy, because as an example, we had a very good researcher who was not necessarily the best programmer. So our experts took the code and speed it up 40,000 times, and instead of supercomputer, we saved a lot of energy because he continued his running in a laptop. So I think we should. Well, we have been talking about different parts of the ecosystem, so everything influences everything. So that's, I think, the European collaboration also, or global collaboration in this area, is very important in many ways.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Driving towards the end, I would have a final question open towards the future. So Utsi, you're leading the research lab and obviously looking at longer term developments. So what are really the challenges that you see being the most complex to solve in the future of HPC in the journey to exascale and post-exascale?
Well, if I had a good glass crystal ball to look into, it would be easier. But what we're seeing is the heterogeneity is increasing. We heard GPUs, we heard quantum as an accelerator today, but there's much more. There's all kinds of new devices coming up that certain companies or academic institutions believe will solve particular problems. And we'll see how many of those end up in the top HPC systems. We see memory disintegration directly attached to the fabric. We see the fabric, which was always one of the core pieces of HPC systems, becoming even more important in all of that. And FPGAs are back, or there for the first time. That's a point of discussion. We see FPGAs on CPUs as a component, potentially. So this makes the programming of all of these devices much more complicated in our traditional programming paradigms. And I see both the new heterogeneous hardware landscape and the reduction to a reasonable set in maybe 10 years of standard components again, and their programmability as the main challenge. And that goes back to skills development. That goes back to educating users and shielding users from the complexity. We heard all of that in the panel before.
Great. Anyone else wants to offer some very final comments on the challenges in the future of HPC? Michael?
Some positive news for everyone. I'm in this business now for 32 years, and what I've learned is that HPC means juggling with 5 to 8 hot potatoes, and it will stay like this for the next 10 years at least. and you will have to enjoy it, and you will have to be very good at that. But the challenges will be new every month, every year. No worries, we have a bright future of challenges ahead of us. Thank you.
Great. And Anders, any final comments on your end?
I think it's been touched upon. I think one of the HPC programming model is complicated. I think we'll get help, but from a different angle, which is the normal programming model is becoming equally complicated because of the multi-core designs. So I think we need to solve that problem, not just for HPC, but in general. There's a huge need for training, for everyone to get to know how to use a 32 or 64 core CPU in a desktop computer, because that again fits into saving energy, getting most out of that equipment, and so on. So the general programming model is getting more and more complicated. So we need to find a solution that hopefully will then also help us on the HPC side.
Great. Thank you for that, Anders. Unless there are any final comments, I will then drive the session to a closure. I would like to really warmly thank all of you for making such a complex technical topic accessible to a broader audience. I think we heard about the importance of really showcasing real-life use cases to broaden the usage of the HPC technology, and hopefully our event today could contribute to that objective. Once again, a warm thank you for being with us today. The session will be available in a replay, and it's part of the Thought Leadership series that HP is organizing with Forum Europe. I hope you will find it insightful, and I wish you a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Have a nice summer.